Welcome back to Let's Talk Tax, the podcast for growth-minded CPAs and consulting professionals navigating today's evolving tax and business landscape. I'm your guest host, Jerry Hammel. Joining me today is my colleague, Justin Gephart, a shareholder at McGuire Sponsel. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks, Jerry. Well, I'm excited for today. We finally get on a podcast together. And then even the subject, we're so used to talking the technical piece of tax updates and legislation. This one's a little bit different as we talk about data and the management process of that. So I'm pumped.
Well, we've had a lot of conversations, I know, throughout the years.
Yeah.
With me being in the office and being at McGuire Sponsel, coming up on my 5-year anniversary.
There you go.
And we kind of geek out over this. So I think it'll be a little fun.
Yeah.
Anymore data is no longer just thinking about storage. I think storage has been the big thing, security, and both of those are still important. But I think it's more about strategy now. So how can consulting firms and CPA firms, think differently about that? So my question for you is, when we say data management in our world, in this consulting service, CPA service firm world, what do we really mean?
Yeah, I think data, from our accounting minds, we love data, right? It's capturing the data, it's storing it, it's then utilizing it from a strategic approach. Really 4 areas that I look at it from a data perspective: personnel management, client retention / client service, process improvement, and then strategic growth. And so I think as we kind of dive into each of those areas, how do we take the data that is at our fingertips and make strategic decisions based upon that? You look at the personnel management, that can be anything from, we love our billable hours, right? But looking at utilization versus realization, looking at consistency and efficiency for those people. Client retention and client service, how are we able to identify other opportunities? I think from a CPA perspective, we focus on getting the tax work done, the compliance work, but how are we looking outside of that box and checking that off? Process improvement for your team. How do we perform the work more efficiently, more accurately to help increase the margins on the work that we do and stay competitive with a fee standpoint? And then strategic growth. What is the data that we're using to make those decisions moving forward?
I think those are kind of 4 pillar areas, I think, when I think of the data and how you use it. I think that's really interesting. How would you explain the data management to a CPA or consultant who thinks of it only as tech stuff?
Well, I think outside just the tech stuff, it's, again, capturing it, organizing it, and using it to your advantage. It's shifted so much out of the tech side. I mean, you look at it from our HR standpoint. We recently hired a CPO because people is such a large part of our firm and the growth that we've experienced. We need to be able to make smarter decisions in order to retain people and to get the right talent. So within that, our Kylie, who's our CPO, has brought on Aptive Index. It's an AI feature. It's a personality. It matches candidates up even before we get them onto the team. So we're interviewing the right people that fit the criteria we look at. It's all data points. So when you talk about just the tech side, it's evolving way beyond that.
Yeah, and so Justin, that brings something to mind for me, and that is, we don't want to take the human element out of it, but I think what we're doing is we're minimizing the human element and using some metrics to really filter down, like, for example, these good candidates for the job we want. What are the skills they need? And instead of going with our gut and reading the resume, we run through this Aptive Index, or Kylie does, and she helps us narrow the field, and then the human element comes in. Well, now who's the best fit from a relationship standpoint, gets along with the team and all of that. But we don't make that human mistake up front when we're filtering the resumes.
Yeah, and when you talk about potential risk if CPA firms don't evolve to this data management piece, I really look at it as, how are you able to manage the risk of failure? And using this human component, we've swung and missed a lot on some of the hires. People component, we sit across the table, we like that person, but we don't know what their inner workings are.
Right.
We had that data side to it, and now we can make smarter decisions. We know, we look at what makes a successful person within our firm and within each practice line, and we take a lot of those data sets and then we apply it to those applicants, which helps reduce that. Listen, you're still going to swing, you're still going to miss.
Just getting ready to say that.
But it's going to help minimize that, absolutely.
Yeah. It's managing the risk of that.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think that is one of the biggest risks. Well, I guess that's a question. That's a risk with hiring staff or hiring people. But what's the biggest risk firms face if they ignore data management?
A strategic approach to everything. Again, that people side, but you talk about growth, when to grow, how to grow, where to grow. Again, I think about the evolution of our firm. Where do we launch offices at? Mm-hmm. What data are we pulling in to make sure that we're in the geographic locations that make sense? As you look at clients, how are we taking care and serving our clients to the best of our abilities? Are we looking outside the box to provide value to them? So if they don't latch on to the data side of this, I think you're going to find a lot of clients that over the coming years are going to not be pleased with their service because they're going to realize that there are other opportunities out there. I mean, think about it from our perspective. Mm-hmm. How many clients come to us and say, "Oh, talk to me about the R&D credit. I haven't heard about this yet," or property tax. And it's making sure that we have that data so we can proactively reach out to those clients and make sure that they're aware of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge risk for any consulting firm. But I think the other pressure on that risk too is the data management and using the data allows you to be way more effective and efficient with your people's time. And because I think the big pressure is, oh yeah, we'll do that. But if you just chug through that and do it just through personal effort, it takes a lot of time. Mm-hmm. So what I love about the data management and leaning into it is respect your staff's time. I mean, we only have so much time. It's hard to find good staff. We all know that. It's what we've heard from the industry forever. So let's not wait to do value-added or consulting services for clients, for example, but let's use the data to do it more effectively, and you can make sure you're covering your entire client base. So if you have 8 or 10 offices, how do you know that all the offices are approaching it the same way, right? Well, through data management, I think you can get some comfort that it's going to be a more consistent approach.
I think some of the biggest holdback that I've heard from firms is it's such a large task. It can be. I mean, mm-hmm. I've helped implement 2 CRM systems in our firm. It's initially a heavy haul, and it's almost like it's so large, where do you start? Mm-hmm. And I think the important message is you got to just start somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, the data's never going to be perfect, but you have to start in order for that data to evolve, and therefore your strategic measuring conversations evolve alongside with that. So that's, you talk about risk. It's the risk of just letting that fear
hold you back.
Hold you back. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure you're not going to sit here and say that you didn't make any mistakes or learn anything when you implemented CRM, right?
Oh yeah. My wife would tell me I make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, but I think that's the important part is just get started. You're not going to have this scripted from day one. You're going to learn as you go, and as you learn a little more, you're going to tweak it, and you're going to say, okay, nope. I mean, I can think back since I've joined how many times we've changed data fields in Salesforce,
yep.
Right? And it's because we figure out different ways to use it, maybe information we want to gather for a taxpayer or for an alliance firm, and we pivot so that we constantly are getting better information to use and manage.
Well, and I think that speaks a little bit to how we're approaching the data management is we want it to be dynamic. Mm-hmm. We know that the environment's going to change, so the results that we're looking for have to adapt. And I know Brittany Lemaster, who has really taken on a lot of that internal data piece for our firm, has done an exceptional job of taking something like Salesforce and constantly tweaking it. I mean, if you really look at it, when you bring in these data management systems, it's the first piece is the initial implementation. Mm-hmm. And then you've got to get everybody onboarded, utilizing the program. And then you kind of get to this third phase of the optimization.
Yeah.
You're learning how to change the data, how to make adjustments, how to pull out the best data for your decision-making process.
Yeah, I think so. And I think just being fully transparent, McGuire Sponsel's journey hasn't ended with Salesforce. Right. I mean, I think you and I have talked about, hey, it's functioning very well, right? We're using it very well, but are all 110 people utilizing it? And do we have improvements to be made where people are still keeping notes outside of the CRM system, right? And so I think we still have a long ways to go, but we've started the journey.
Yeah, and I think the other piece that you've been a big part of is also making sure that our different platforms can talk to each other so we don't, you talk about the human capital or the time that it's involved. How do we eliminate redundant data entry? Mm-hmm. And there are platforms out there that as these firms are utilizing different data sets, how do we get them to talk to each other?
Absolutely, and we have, and and that's not just me, but that's a big driver. Is okay. We want our data to be 100% accurate, and so I think it's not only redundant entries, but also you could have differences in your databases if you're using 4 or 5 different programs within the firm, and one program's not driving the data, so it's all being used from the same source.
Yeah.
And that's been a big push this year for us, the last 12 months. And I think that's big. And we're not done. There's other areas within the firm that we will also drive data from that point, from Salesforce, quite honestly, to some of these other software programs we use.
When you look at the technology committee that we formed, that's a big driver of how do we utilize the software we currently have? Are there better options out there? So that way we don't have 3 or 4 silos within our firm operating differently. And then also trying to tackle this whole AI piece. AI is such a large, theme. It means something different to everybody. So how can we utilize that in our firm? And what does that look like? I think a couple of things that those individuals that we've tasked with that are looking at is, okay, within the AI, and something for firms to realize, who owns the data once you start using some of the chats and other AI features. But then also, are those bots are they using your data to train themselves? And those are very important questions that our team is trying to explore and trying to go after.
Yeah, I think couple points. I think when we say this tech committee that we formed, that really came out of our strategic partner retreat last winter. And the tech committee isn't, I think you accurately called it a software committee. I mean, it's really intended not to look at hardware and the blocking and tackling of security and just your systems. It's more intended to look for those efficiencies and process improvements, so that our folks can leverage their time, can use more efficient processes and whatnot, in doing their day-to-day tasks.
Yeah,
and just being smart with our time.
We've got a lot of great people, a lot of smart people. So how do we get them to spend more time consulting and advising clients and less time in maybe the day-to-day data entry? And that's where their heads are at, so we can potentially increase kind of their work-life balance of what they enjoy doing while they're at work. And very few people like to sit there and enter data into an Excel file. So how do we limit that and get them out in front of clients more often?
Right. Completely agree. I think the other thing you mentioned, which I think is pretty important, is you talked about who owns the data in that AI realm. From my standpoint, I look at, okay, well, any data you're putting out in this AI platform is really open to the world. And so it's very, in a world of confidentiality, and we work with a lot of client taxpayer information that's confidential, and sensitive information. So you can't upload that into that space. So, as we're looking at some of these things in our software committee, it's okay, well, what is an environment that's just ours, right? And then, so it's non-penetrable, and we can actually use client data to hone in on these processes. And so as we've looked at different platforms, that was the key driver, was where is it that we can have AI learn for us and have our own AI, and not expose our client data.
Yeah, that client data is a big piece. I think it could be a huge liability for firms if they don't manage that process correctly. We went through and put in internal policies on what you're allowed to input into some of these features, because we don't want to share our specific client data.
Right.
We need to be able to frame it in a loose way to where we can help get maybe some answers or structure it a little bit differently without giving up the client's sensitive information. So I think it's something that we'll see over the next 2-3 years, where firms are going to have to get their kind of hands around the subject of how liable could this information be.
Sure. Well, so that's a good lead into where do you see the role of data management going in the next 3 to 5 years for firms like ours?
Yeah, I think the hot topic that you hear a lot of firms talk about is this consulting/advisory mindset. And the data management's going to allow firms to get that. We talk about the labor force. They don't have enough people to do the day-to-day task of, typical compliance. So how can they bring in the data management help, the AI features, to take some of that work off their plates and then allow their teams to shift towards that advisory mindset? I think also the couple trends that I'm starting to see within firms, or maybe some industries outside the CPA industry, is who are they starting to hire? A lot of larger organizations are starting to hire college graduates that have been trained up in the AI world. And so they can teach them their day-to-day business, but that ability to come in and build out some of these process improvements has changed the state of their company.
Yeah. Couple things that come to mind for me there. One is, when you're talking about using AI, I mean, I think the last, 15, 20 years, a lot of firms have offshored, for staff. Yeah. And I think from my perspective, it's not really one or the other. I know a lot of firms that have offshored and have built a very good program to do that, but they're also exploring AI. So I think it's a combination. You can't just be happy with finding more staff, outsourcing across the ocean or whatever, and getting more capabilities and more hours from staff. It's also, so you still need to use AI. It's not either or, in my opinion.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And then secondly, I guess what advice would you give a CPA firm leader who's overwhelmed by the idea of data management?
You just have to start. And I know I said that earlier, but I was working with the R&D team earlier this week on some of their data entry, and there was this little pause of, gosh, it's not perfect right now, and how are we going to get it perfect now? And it's no, just you have to start, because you're going to need that data, the consistent data entry, in order for that perfect data to finally formalize. So you have to just jump in and make sure your teams are at least starting the data, and that you're constantly monitoring it and making sure that you adapt with the data.
Mm-hmm. And I think a good starting point is, I mean, we're a relatively small firm, I would say, 100, 110 people.
Yeah.
But I think with larger firms or firms, I mean, to me, the place to start is sitting down with your IT team so that you understand the programs, the type of data that's stored in each. So you almost have to do an inventory.
Yeah. And I would add, coming up with a goal. What do you want out of here? Data can be a black hole. I think about when we implemented our CRM system and all the pieces we wanted within that. Well, we could have taken the time from our consultants, and they could have spent all day entering in data. So what are the points that we want to go after to make sure that we're thinking about it from a smart perspective? What's our goal with that? And I think that helps at least get you started on that right path.
And saying that, a question comes to my mind, and that is, so we had a bunch of data, right, that we were using, and then we jumped on with Salesforce, and you just jumped in. Did you try to go back and clean up the data, or did you just start using it and clean as you go?
Yeah, our first CRM system, it was a learning experience. And so when we switched to Salesforce, we cleaned the data up before it got into the system.
Okay.
Again, we had the luxury of going through a painful learning experience on the first side, where we learned what we wanted out of the data. So we took the time to go in and clean it going into Salesforce.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I'm sure I wasn't here at that time because we adopted Salesforce before I joined the firm. Yeah. But I've got to imagine that was a pretty painful process.
It was a nightmare.
Well, what do you think? I mean, I mentioned talking to the IT team, but what should firms think about in terms of partnerships to supplement their internal resources?
Yeah. I think the investment, we always talk about the investments within our firm, realizing that there's going to be an initial investment in this, and you may not see ROI immediately. And you got to have a little bit of a longer vision with this, knowing that 2-3 years out, that's when you're really going to start to see the benefit of the initial investment in the technology side.
Yeah, and you answered my question. I was going to ask, what's your ROI for that typically? And you're saying 2 to 3 years.
I think 2 to 3 years, because again, the first year you're really dealing with the implementation. You can get some short-term benefit out of it, but your true strategic piece, you have to go through 1 to 2 years where you're starting to learn, okay, all right, we put this data in, maybe it wasn't what we really wanted at the time. Now we need to sub some data in it instead of that. Year 2, year 3 is when you really start to optimize your approach to this process, which to me, that's when you start to see the ROI. Now you can sit down with a Tim LeMasters, who's director of our Alliance Network, and forecast into the future and say, regionally, here's where we're doing well, here's where we're not doing well, and how do we best approach that? So I say that 2 to 3 year mark is key.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And I know we're getting near the end of our show today, but so I always like to leave everybody with one key nugget, right? So what's one action a CPA or consulting firm leader can take this week to set themselves up for better data management in the future?
I think obviously assessing where they're currently at with their data system, but then sitting down as a partner group or an investor group and saying, what is our goal? Where do we need to become better? And then diving in and jumping off that ledge, so to speak.
Which is scary and hard to do for a lot of people, especially if they're very formal and structured and they want the answer now. This just isn't an area where you're going to have the answer to now. Where the answer right now, it's more of a journey.
Yeah, and my fear is if you don't start jumping into this aspect, your firm's going to get left behind. With as quick as data is coming out right now, and you add the AI and its continual process improvement, if you don't make the plunge, you're going to be left behind in this.
Yeah, it's not something you can sit on the sidelines and wait.
Correct.
The time is now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Your clients aren't going to be served correctly because you're going to miss opportunities. Your staff, they're going to see it elsewhere and want the excitement and want the strategic approach. I mean, think about all the discussions we have with people around our firm. They like our 2030 vision because it's organized. They know where we're going. They know what we're thinking outside the box to get them there. That's exciting for them.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's like a compass.
Yeah.
And it also, a big part of our 2030 vision is the use of technology and the use of efficient processes. So I think that gets them excited as well. Well, that wraps up today's conversation on data management and what it means for consulting firms and CPA partners. A big thank you to Justin.
Thanks, Jerry,
for sharing his perspective on how our firm is approaching this challenge and why it matters so much for growth. As we have heard, effective data management isn't just a back office function, it's a competitive advantage. And I think Justin's emphasized that today. From building platform synergy to fostering adoption across teams, firms that invest in getting this right will be better equipped to serve clients, scale effectively, and stay ahead of what's coming next. So thank you very much for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about how McGuire Sponsel supports CPA firms with both technical expertise and operational strategy, visit McGuireSponsel.com or reach out to our team directly. And as always, thanks for listening to Let's Talk Tax. We'll see you next time.